Welcome to Scruffy Tales. In today's video, we will take a quick look at the Swedish Archer artillery system that will be deployed to Ukraine eventually. We will take a look at the importance of artillery, of what the Archer was designed to do in its role as self-propelled artillery, its capabilities, and also a brief look at the ammunition it can fire at the enemy. Modern artillery has moved away from what I would call classical artillery, the artillery used during the age of muskets, when you aimed cannons straight at enemy blocks of infantry and fired bouncing cannonballs at them. In fact, this classical form of artillery has evolved into our modern tanks. Eventually, the old artillery was made lighter so that it could become mobile with the help of horses. You could even relocate the guns during a battle quickly to take advantage of the changes happening on the battlefield, which is exactly what you do with a modern tank. You move a big cannon around to fire directly at the enemy. So, the classical artillery has become the modern tank. So, what is modern artillery, as I see it at least? The traditional modern artillery does not fire directly at an enemy. It fires indirectly, lobbing shells of long distances, firing over obstacles such as hills and forests and towns and other terrain features. This allows you to keep your artillery far away from the front line and out of harm's way from enemy units, in theory, obviously. It allows your artillery to not only engage the enemy fighting your troops on the front line, but you can also target enemy positions far behind the front, such as command posts and supply depots, for instance. Artillery is the king of warfare and has been for at least 2 centuries. Even to this day, with smart missiles and tanks and helicopters, artillery is still the weapon that kills the most enemy troops. Around 70 to 75% of all casualties in war for the past 100 years have been caused by artillery and indirect fire. In war, plate carriers are useless. In war, plate carriers won't save you. Good old school flak vests will save you. You should be more worried about artillery than tanks, helicopters, and machine guns. Artillery is without a doubt the most important weapon system in any army, and you cannot win a war without artillery. People talk about air superiority and tanks all the time, but they can't do anything without artillery, because without artillery you won't kill those 70 to 75% of the enemy. Artillery kills anti-air batteries. Artillery kills ATGM crews. Artillery kills everything you need to kill to allow aircraft and tanks to do their job. And since artillery is so deadly, so important, so crucial, obviously it becomes critical to locate and destroy enemy artillery. Because if you take out the enemy artillery, you won't lose as many of your own troops. So, this means you want to find enemy artillery, relying on special forces, aerial recon, or spies, or intercepted communications, etc. And when you do find enemy artillery, you attack it with your own artillery, or with a missile strike. This is the artillery duel. What artillery used to do was to fire as many guns as possible, as fast as possible, at the target location and saturate that area with a barrage. To counter this, to avoid losing too many guns to one such barrage, you spread out your artillery so you have something like 1 gun per square kilometer. Obviously, this makes it difficult to target many guns at the same time, so your artillery battery might take out one artillery position with one barrage, and a barrage required several guns and several salvos. One issue with the traditional modern artillery is that it takes time to set up and time to get moving again. Each gun requires a large crew and takes quite some time to reload. Artillery is slow to move, slow to get into position, and slow to fire, and slow to relocate when required. So, if your tanks want to push hard and break through enemy positions, their advance could be slowed down because they have no artillery support, because the artillery is not able to move with the speed of the tanks. And if your position is discovered, well, you can't really move your gun out of the way quickly enough before enemy fire starts striking your location. To counter this issue, the self-propelled gun was created. Self-propelled guns, or SPGs, is simply put an artillery piece bolted onto a vehicle, usually tracked but also wheeled. And this obviously allowed artillery to quickly move, quickly set up, and quickly relocate. They could move with the tanks and ensure that artillery support was always available. It also allowed artillery batteries to move around behind the front to support areas where they were the most needed. Despite all the obvious advantages of the SPGs, traditional static artillery didn't go away, because they're cheaper and that means you can field more guns. They support different parts of an operation, you might say. The main advantage of an SPG over static artillery is the ability to shoot and scoot. Hit and run, you could call it. You fire a few rounds and then move and relocate. The ability to shoot and scoot quickly makes it difficult for special forces to find you, makes it difficult for area recon to locate you, and it makes it really hard for the enemy artillery to fire back at you as a consequence. So, if you're in an SPG going up against a static artillery gun, you can move and fire, aiming at the same location every time. The enemy with this static gun, well, they won't be able to move if they want to be able to shoot. And if they want to hit you, they will have to rearrange their gun all the time. And when this became apparent to military leaders, then lighter and faster SPGs became very popular. And the concept of artillery duels took on a whole new character when radar was introduced. Counter-battery radar systems are quite exceptional pieces of equipment. Using radar, they spot incoming artillery rounds, even mortar rounds, and they then calculate the trajectory of these rounds as they fly through the air and backtrack that trajectory to the position they were fired from. So, by spotting the enemy's shells flying through the air, you calculate where he is located and shooting from. And this information, these coordinates, are then forwarded to your own artillery. And this takes only a few minutes, so depending on range, say 10 minutes at most after you have fired your first shot, enemy shells will land on your exact location. As you can imagine, this is not a fight where static artillery has the upper hand, despite being numerous and being spread out with only one gun per square kilometer. Counter-battery radar has made shoot and scoot, hit and run, essential for the survival of an artillery piece. The faster you can move out of harm's way, the better, and wheeled trucks are faster than tracked armored vehicles, which is why the wheeled truck has become the ultimate expression of artillery in the modern era. There are many variants of truck-mounted artillery from many countries, but the one we will obviously focus on is the Swedish-made Archer artillery system, in Sweden known as Artillerisystem 8. An Archer is an entire system and not just a truck with a gun. The gun is in fact the FH-77B WL-52, and it is mounted on a Volvo A30D all-terrain hauler. Combined with logistics and supply vehicles, they all create the Archer artillery system. But for ease sake, we will call the truck with its gun the Archer. The Archer entered into service in 2016, with development beginning in 1995. It has a crew of 3 and fires up to 8 rounds per minute. Its top speed is quite impressive, able to reach 90 km per hour, 56 miles per hour on road. Before we go into any more details, we will take a look at the doctrine and history of Swedish artillery during the Cold War, the core ideas for what would set the stage for the development of the archer. In 1967, Sweden took into service an exceptional piece of artillery, the self-propelled gun known as BCAN-1, short for Bandkanon 1. The BCAN-1 would go down in history as the fastest firing 155mm SPG in the world. 15 rounds in 45 seconds. And if you're curious, the fastest rate of fire the American SPGs possessed at the time was 4 rounds per minute. Let that one sink in. The reason for this remarkable SPG being developed was that Sweden feared a Soviet invasion, and the Red Army had far more artillery pieces than Sweden could field. Sweden could not win the artillery duel against the Red Army, so the few guns Sweden had to make up for the lack of numbers with high rates of fire. One battery had to fire the same amount of shells as 4 or 5 batteries. The solution was to design a magazine and an autoloader, essentially creating a machine gun, but one that fired 155mm artillery shells. The magazine held 2 clips of 7 rounds each, and one clip could be replaced with a fully loaded clip in 2 minutes, with the aid of a crane moving the loaded clip from a logistics truck. It was also intended to operate within the Swedish doctrine of free war. Sweden realized that the Red Army outnumbered Swedish forces. The likelihood of communications being severed and units being surrounded and cut off was considered high and very likely. Free war, simply put, was a standing order that each unit that found itself on its own would continue fighting no matter what, resorting to guerrilla warfare until they could link up with friendly forces. Free war included everyone, every unit, even civilians, so artillery batteries were expected to fight a guerrilla war if they were cut off. This included the BCAN-1. Shoot and scoot, hit and run, guerrilla warfare with artillery was part of the Swedish defense doctrine. Sweden relied on traditional artillery as well, not only the big, heavy and expensive BCAN-1. In 1977, Sweden adopted a piece of field artillery that would become legendary, the FH-77A, capable of firing 7 155mm rounds in 21 seconds. Again, a high rate of fire would make up for a lack of numbers compared to the Red Army. The FH-77 had one more nice addition, a small engine that allowed it to quickly realign under its own power to line up with a new firing mission. Later on, the FH-77A would be upgraded to the FH-77B, and these guns would be used for the development of the Archer, becoming the FH-77B WL-52. So, these two artillery systems were very much at the core as the Archer was being developed. Fast-moving, fast-firing, and intended to operate independently if needed. The Archer is the end product of a doctrine of guerrilla warfare that included every aspect of the armed forces of Sweden. Shoot and scoot, hit and run, move and fire again. Continue to fight even when outnumbered and surrounded. And 70 years of free war doctrine has provided the Swedish armed forces with the Archer artillery system. The Archer is capable of firing 8 155mm rounds per minute if needed, and has a magazine capacity of 20. Reloading the magazine takes around 10 minutes from the ammunition truck with the help of cranes and automated systems. The Archer requires only 30 seconds from being on the move to being ready to fire, and another 30 seconds to be on the move again. There is no need for the 3-man crew to step outside, everything is done from within the vehicle. The entire system could be operated by a single soldier if needed.
The archers can move around and stop only when they receive the coordinates of a target. They stop, fire the rounds required, and then are on the move again. Within a minute, maybe two, the archer has stopped, fired 3 to 6 rounds, and is on the move again and out of the danger area, safe from getting hit by counterfire. As the enemy responds with their own artillery, other archers can then fire on the enemy artillery, relying on counter battery radar. This is what the archer excels at, the artillery duel. Any artillery can take out a fixed target. Artillery has been doing that for centuries, but the ability to move and shoot, hit and run, shoot and scoot, winning deadly artillery duels, that is what the archer is the master of, and other systems are hard-pressed to defeat it. And with the ammunition truck carrying up to 100 shells, it can move around and resupply archers when needed. The archers can link up with fuel trucks when needed. There is no fixed supply route. There is no need for a static supply depot. The ammo and the fuel can be as mobile as the gun. Everything is on the move, moving to wherever they are needed, reloading, refueling, or firing as required. It is a system designed to be artillery guerrilla warfare. Static artillery cannot defeat it, and other mobile artillery platforms need to be damn quick to stand a chance against the archer system. Another ability that the archer possesses is MRSI, multiple round simultaneous impact. This is not unique to the archer by any means, but it has the ability, and it means you fire several rounds at different angles at the same target. Each trajectory perfectly calculated to ensure that all rounds strike the target at the same time. The reason for this is that artillery kills with the first rounds of the barrage. As soon as shells hit, soldiers run for cover, unsurprisingly. So you want as many shells hitting as possible in those first few seconds when the enemy is surprised by the incoming fire, before they get their act together and find cover. So that should give you a good idea of what the archer is and what it can do. It's artillery, so it will be involved with the 70 to 75% of the enemy's casualties. It can set up quickly, fire quickly, and be back on the move in an instant, minimizing the risk of getting hit by enemy artillery or even being found by enemy reconnaissance, ensuring its survival. It can be operated by a single soldier. It can be fully reloaded in 10 minutes, all 20 shells in its magazine. It will win most, close to all artillery duels. It will accurately destroy all static targets. It is the master of hit and run, of shoot and scoot. But the gun and everything else is only part of the story. Just as important as the gun are the shells it can fire. After all, shells determine range and what happens on impact. Using standard shells, the range is 30 kilometers. Using base bleed ammunition, the range is extended to 40 kilometers. Base bleed ammunition is a cheap way of extending range without relying on rockets and was developed in Sweden in the 60s. And we will continue with shells developed in Sweden. We jump straight to the famous long-range round called Excalibur that Bofors helped develop. It has a range of 50 kilometers, but we're seeing reports of ranges up to 60 and even 70 kilometers, which is pretty impressive considering it is a guided precision weapon intended to ensure a hit with a single round, where a traditional unguided bombardment would have required as many as 50 shells to ensure a hit. Moving on to the next Swedish developed artillery round, known as Bonus, with a 35-kilometer range. This is a fancy piece of equipment, if you ask me, developed in 1985 and taken into service in 1992. It contains 2 heat rounds that when deployed, scan for armored targets, guide themselves into position, and then fire the penetrator from above, ensuring a guaranteed kill. As we've seen in Ukraine with the Javelin and NLAW, top attacks against tanks are extremely effective. In fact, the NLAW is based on the Swedish ATGM called Build 2, or RB56B as the Swedish Armed Forces calls it, also from the 80s, just like the bonus shell. And the Bill and Build 2, just like the NLAW, would fly in over its target and kill it from above. Bill was in fact the world's first top attack missile, and then of course was closely followed by bonus. Another side note is the mortar version of the bonus called Strix. Strix is a 120mm mortar round that also contains a heat round that guides itself onto an armored target. So top attack weapons have been a Swedish trademark for almost 40 years, and we're seeing both the bonus rounds and the NLAW being used to great effect in Ukraine. So, with standard ammunition, the archers can engage trenches and bunkers. With Excalibur, they can take out high-profile targets deep behind enemy lines. And with bonus, they can go tank hunting. And with its unmatched shoot and scoot capabilities, there will be precious little that Russia can do to stop the archers from raining hellfire down upon them. Currently in service in Sweden and soon the United Kingdom, Ukraine will obviously also soon use these in their war against the Russian invaders. Besides these countries, the US is a possible candidate to field the Archer, as is Switzerland. Norway famously backed out of a deal to purchase 24 Archers and instead obtained the South Korean K9 SPG. That is it for now, a short, brief look at the Archer and its intended role on the battlefield. I think it will be very useful for Ukraine, and it will probably be a nightmare for Russian troops. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Go på marsch, Ukraine!